In the autumn of 1940, inside the soundproofed war rooms of London and Washington, high-ranking military strategists were staring at a world map in a state of quiet panic. History books often teach us that the primary threat to the free world was the tactical speed of the German panzer divisions in France, or the sudden, terrifying expansion of the Imperial Japanese Navy across the Pacific. But the true nightmare scenario, the one that kept Allied planners awake at night, was not a single battle, nor a revolutionary new weapon. It was a cold, mathematical formula designed years earlier in the lecture halls of Munich University, the Great Eurasian Continental Alliance. To the military strategists of the British Admiralty, this wasn't just another alliance, it was a mathematical checkmate. The logic behind the strategy was as simple as it was devastating. If you combine the cutting-edge industrial technology and organizational discipline of Germany, the virtually unlimited natural resources, manpower, and strategic depth of the Soviet Union, and the dominant naval power of Imperial Japan, you create an impenetrable, self-sustaining global fortress, an alliance spanning 13 time zones, stretching continuously from the English Channel to the Pacific Ocean. A geopolitical monolith that would instantly render the Royal Navy's legendary blockades completely useless and leave the economic and industrial power of the United States isolated, trapped, and irrelevant across the Atlantic.
And the most chilling part of this story, it almost worked. For a brief, terrifying window of time between August 1939 and June 1941, this grand continental bloc was not just a theoretical nightmare, it was actively taking shape. Long freight trains loaded with Soviet oil, manganese, and grain were rolling west straight into the heart of the Reich, fueling the German war machine. At the very same time, Japanese diplomatic cables and secret intelligence networks were sharing high-level naval intelligence with Berlin, laying the groundwork for a coordinated global assault. So why did this unstoppable geopolitical engine break down? Why did the Axis commanders abandon a mathematical formula that almost guaranteed them absolute global victory? To answer that, we have to look far beyond standard battlefield propaganda and textbook summaries. We have to dive deep into a hidden world of secret intelligence networks, occult-leaning warrior societies in Tokyo, a forgotten German general turned professor who manipulated Nazi foreign policy from the shadows, and a desperate, unauthorized solo flight across the North Sea to Scotland that marked the beginning of the end for the Third Reich. Today, we go behind the scenes of World War II's most dangerous strategy to uncover how cold geopolitical math was shattered by ideological madness, leading to the ultimate collapse of the Axis war machine.
To understand why the Axis came to exist, you have to look at the world map through the eyes of one deeply humiliated German general, Karl Haushofer. In November 1918, Germany didn't just lose a war, its economy was shattered and its military disarmed. But while most officers wallowed in bitterness, Haushofer, a former imperial attaché in Tokyo, looked at the defeat through a much colder lens. He realized a fundamental truth. Germany hadn't been defeated by tactics on the battlefield. It had been starved by the brutal math of global logistics. Under Versailles, Germany was stripped of its colonies, merchant fleet, and trade routes. Meanwhile, Britain and the United States controlled every maritime choke point: Suez, Gibraltar, Singapore, and almost all global oil and raw materials. Haushofer knew that in any future war, an isolated Germany in Central Europe would always run out of fuel and grain. Britain and America could simply close the sea gates and wait for Germany to collapse. From his chair at Munich University, Haushofer launched an intellectual counterattack: geopolitik. Drawing on theories of land power versus sea power, he argued that oceanic empires were vulnerable. If connected continuously across geography, land power was indestructible. Haushofer drew a radical conclusion. Germany's survival depended on forming an unbreakable continental bloc with two other dissatisfied powers, the Soviet Union and Imperial Japan. To Haushofer, ideology was irrelevant.
Ideologies were just slogans for the masses. What mattered was space, geography, and resources. He envisioned a grand Eurasian alliance. Germany supplies advanced engineering and industry. The USSR provides unlimited oil, grain, and strategic depth. Japan provides a lethal naval hammer in the Pacific to pin down Anglo-American fleets. In the 1920s, Haushofer began quietly building this strategy. He supported secret military cooperation with the Red Army in Kazan and Lipetsk to build banned tanks and train pilots. Simultaneously, he maintained private intelligence channels with Japanese naval officers through his Munich Institute. His most fateful step happened in the lecture halls of Munich, where he mentored a young veteran, Rudolf Hess. Hess absorbed Haushofer's theories of geopolitics and Lebensraum, and when Hess was imprisoned in Landsberg Castle in 1924 with Adolf Hitler, Haushofer became a frequent visitor, bringing maps and geopolitical calculations straight to Hitler's cell. Hitler eagerly adopted the terms, but completely missed the point. Where Haushofer saw a cold alliance of survival, Hitler saw only an ideological stepping stone toward his own racial war.
By the mid-1930s, the theoretical blueprints drawn in Munich were beginning to translate into real-world intelligence operations. While official diplomats worked through traditional channels, the true architecture of the Berlin-Tokyo alliance was built through a clandestine network of secret societies, military attachés, and private intelligence pipelines, with Karl Haushofer standing right at the center. To understand why a conservative German general could build such a deep connection with Imperial Japan, you have to go back to 1908. As a young officer in Tokyo, Haushofer had gained unprecedented access to the highest levels of Japanese society. He studied Japanese, learned the samurai code of Bushido, and built ties with powerful ultra-nationalist organizations like the Kokuryu-kai, the famous Black Dragon Society. The Black Dragon Society wasn't just a political club, it was an elite shadow intelligence network that heavily influenced the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy. They believed in total Asian dominance and the complete expulsion of Western powers. When Haushofer returned to Germany, he brought these connections with him. He convinced Nazi leadership that despite their rigid racial doctrines, the Japanese were, in his words, the Aryans of the East, natural allies for a total war against the Anglo-American maritime powers.
Throughout the 1930s, Haushofer's Geopolitical Institute in Munich functioned as a shadow foreign office. It became a meeting point for Japanese naval officers, German military strategists, and intelligence operatives. This wasn't just diplomatic academic talk. It resulted in concrete, actionable intelligence sharing. Consider the case of Bernhard Kuhn, a former German naval officer recruited through networks linked to Haushofer's circle. In the late 1930s, Kuhn was dispatched to Oahu, Hawaii, under the guise of a harmless academic studying local history. He rented a house with an unobstructed view of Pearl Harbor. Equipped with high-powered optics and shortwave radio equipment, Kuhn mapped out the exact berths of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, tracking ship movements, maintenance schedules, and patrol routes. 6 days before December 7, 1941, Kuhn handed his final, lethal tactical grid directly to the Japanese consulate.
This was the Axis strategy in action. Shared intelligence, coordinated goals, and a mutual commitment to pinning down the Western powers on opposite sides of the globe. By late 1940, Haushofer's vision reached its absolute peak. In Berlin, the Tripartite Pact was officially signed, uniting Germany, Italy, and Japan. On paper, the oceanic powers were trapped in a two-ocean nightmare. And when Moscow signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Berlin and a neutrality treaty with Tokyo, the ultimate geopolitical equation seemed complete. The Eurasian landmass was fully locked down. Britain stood completely isolated, and the United States was faced with a nightmare scenario it was nowhere near prepared to fight. Haushofer believed his life's work was fulfilled. The grand continental fortress had been built. But he made one fatal calculation. He assumed the men ruling Berlin were rational geopolitical actors.
By early 1941, the Eurasian strategy looked invincible on paper. Grain, petroleum, and industrial raw materials were pouring from the Soviet Union straight into German factories, completely neutralizing the Royal Navy's blockade. Britain was bleeding in the Atlantic, and Imperial Japan was preparing its carrier strike group for a decisive blow against the United States. The continental fortress was holding, but inside Berlin, a quiet, deadly schism was ripping through the high command. For Karl Haushofer and the realists in the German Foreign Office, the pact with Moscow was a permanent strategic shield. But for Adolf Hitler, it was a temporary, humiliating compromise. Hitler never cared about the cold math of resources. He was obsessed with his ideological dogma of Eastern destruction. By spring 1941, intelligence began leaking to Haushofer's inner circle that Hitler was secretly finalizing Operation Barbarossa, a full-scale invasion of the USSR. To the geopolitical strategists in Munich, this was pure insanity. Attacking the Soviet Union meant breaking the central rule of military geography, opening a two-front war while Britain remained undefeated in the West. It meant turning their primary supplier of oil and grain into their deadliest enemy. Desperate to stop the impending catastrophe, Haushofer turned to his most powerful remaining pupil, Rudolf Hess, the deputy Führer of the Third Reich. Together with Haushofer's son, Albrecht, a brilliant foreign policy expert with secret channels to British aristocracy, they devised an extraordinary, unauthorized gamble. The plan was as bold as it was dangerous. If Germany could reach a secret peace agreement with Britain, the nightmare of a two-front war would be eliminated. Germany could secure its western flank, and the catastrophe of fighting both the British Navy and the Red Army simultaneously could be avoided. On the night of May 10, 1941, Rudolf Hess took off alone from an airfield near Augsburg, piloting a modified Messerschmitt Bf-110. Flying low over the North Sea to evade radar, he crossed into Scottish airspace and parachuted into the dark, landing near the estate of the Duke of Hamilton. Hess carried no weapons, but he brought maps, diplomatic notes, and geopolitical arguments directly crafted by the Haushofers. The mission was a complete disaster. Winston Churchill refused to negotiate, viewing Hess not as an envoy, but as a high-value prisoner. In Berlin, Hitler went into a rage, declaring Hess insane and stripping him of all titles. The flight of Rudolf Hess was not the act of a madman. It was the frantic, dying gasp of the geopolitical faction in Berlin, a desperate, unauthorized attempt by Haushofer's circle to save Germany from Hitler's impending ideological suicide. 6 weeks later, the clock ran out.
On June 22, 1941, at 3:15 in the morning, thousands of German artillery pieces opened fire along a 1,500-mile front stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Operation Barbarossa had begun. With a single order, Adolf Hitler shattered the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, tore up Karl Haushofer's geopolitical doctrine, and handed the Allied powers the greatest strategic gift of the 20th century: time and unified geography. To the German public, the early weeks of the invasion looked like an unstoppable triumph. Millions of Soviet soldiers were encircled, thousands of tanks were destroyed, and the Wehrmacht advanced hundreds of miles into enemy territory. But inside the war rooms of the German General Staff, logistics officers quickly realized that the mathematical nightmare Haushofer had warned about was becoming reality. By breaking the Continental Treaty, Germany instantly cut off its primary source of imported oil, manganese, and grain. Instead of receiving guaranteed endless supplies by rail without firing a shot, Germany was now burning through millions of tons of fuel every single month just to advance through the mud and endless distances of the Russian steppe. The geopolitical equation instantly inverted.
Instead of an isolated Britain facing a unified Eurasian continent, Germany now found itself trapped in the very nightmare Versailles had created. A brutal, multi-front war of attrition against the three greatest industrial and geographic powers on Earth. The Soviet Union provided endless space and manpower. The United States, entering the war months later after the attack on Pearl Harbor, unleashed its unstoppable industrial output. And Great Britain, secured on its island fortress, maintained its unrelenting naval blockade while serving as an unsinkable aircraft carrier for strategic bombing. The isolation of Imperial Japan in the Pacific completed the collapse of the Axis strategy. Without coordination or a shared land bridge to Berlin,
Japan was left to fight a lonely, doomed naval war against the overwhelming industrial capacity of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. The two halves of the Axis could never link up. For Karl Haushofer, the news of 1941 was a personal and intellectual death sentence. He watched in horror as his theories were twisted to justify an ideological war of extermination, a war that violated every fundamental law of military geography. His Munich Institute was placed under Gestapo surveillance. His son, Albrecht, who had helped draft the secret peace proposals for Hesse's flight, joined the anti-Nazi resistance movement. In April 1945, as Soviet troops entered Berlin, Albrecht Haushofer was executed by an SS firing squad in the ruins of the capital, holding a series of poems written in his prison cell that mourned the tragic misuse of geopolitics. When the German Sixth Army surrendered at Stalingrad in February 1943, it wasn't just a tactical defeat, it was the absolute mathematical proof that no army, no matter how advanced its technology or tactical discipline, can survive the violation of basic geopolitical reality. Hitler had chosen ideological madness over cold math, and the math responded by destroying his Reich.
In March 1946, inside a quiet Bavarian farmhouse, an elderly Karl Haushofer sat down to write his final essay, titled Defense of German Geopolitics. Stripped of his academic titles, shunned by the post-war world, and grieving the execution of his son, the old general knew that history would remember him not as a strategist, but as the intellectual godfather of the Nazi war machine. On March 10, 1946, Karl Haushofer and his wife walked into a secluded forest on their estate, swallowed arsenic, and died together. It was a dark, tragic end to a man whose life work had become a warning written in blood. The story of the Axis alliance is often told as a tale of blitzkriegs, carrier battles, and massive military campaigns. But beneath the surface of generals and tanks lies a deeper, harsher lesson about the cold mechanics of power. The grand Eurasian strategy didn't fail because it was mathematically flawed. It failed because it encountered something that no map, no formula, and no academic institute could ever control: the blind, irrational arrogance of total ideological fanaticism. Karl Haushofer created a formula that could have locked down the largest continent on Earth and rewritten the global order for centuries. But when he handed that formula to Adolf Hitler, he forgot that a totalitarian dictatorship operates not on logic, but on ideology.
Hitler didn't want a balanced geopolitical alliance with Moscow and Tokyo. He wanted absolute racial supremacy. And in pursuit of that impossible dream, he shattered the very alliance that made his conquest possible. When we look back at World War II through the lens of geopolitics, we see that victory was not decided solely by tactical genius or heroic speeches. It was decided by geography, logistics, and resource math. The Allies won because they managed to build and maintain the ultimate global coalition, linking the industrial heartland of America, the maritime dominance of Great Britain, and the vast landmass of the Soviet Union. They unified the very elements that the Axis failed to keep together. The collapse of the Axis proves a timeless rule of history. You can win 1,000 tactical battles. You can conquer thousands of square miles of territory. But if your strategy violates the cold, unyielding laws of geography and math, the map will always win in the end. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden geopolitics of World War II, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which geopolitical story we should break down next. See you in the next episode.